Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach, and up next in our Training Periods series, a look at the strength period and race development. And after that, World of Running updates about London Marathon and other past event news. Welcome back. Glad to have you with us. Excited for an interesting episode today on many fronts, World of Running as well as the main topic. And I should note, we just said in the little brief intro, past event news, past, if Boston counts as past event, being only a week ago or so, but some really fun stuff to report as we continue to learn more about things that we've covered in the past, which is always good. Always exciting. Speaking of learning more and things that we cover, we answer your questions, and we do that at the end of the month, which is coming soon. Our next end of month episode is now on the horizon. So if you've been holding off on your question because you want it to be a question that's relevant to the immediate moment when we answer it, ask now, and we'll answer it next week, unless our docket is already full. But go ahead and try and find out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as we've mentioned, this correspondence is what we really enjoy about having the podcast and having running resources. And I got a message from Felicia. She wrote, "Hi, Andy. I just wanted to share that I was thinking back to the conversation I had with you and your husband regarding running and focusing on effort versus pace. At the Boston Marathon, I didn't focus too much on pace because I figured my Strava app would most likely be off with tracking pace. With that said, I ran most of the race focusing on how I felt rather than getting hung up on what pace I was running.
Great.
Yay. I was shocked to see my time at the half marathon. I knew I could do well if I just hung on and tried to at least maintain marathon pace for the last half. I still didn't focus on my pace. I focused on the effort and what I thought I could give throughout. I'm not sure if this is exactly what Zach was saying, but wow, I shocked myself with the time I got. I had a goal of 3:15, but wasn't sure if I'd come close. My time was 3:24 last year. I got 3:14 this year. I'm super happy and excited. I feel I pushed myself more than I ever have at Boston, and I didn't track my pace through most of it." And then she goes on to say like a couple times that she checked in the last few miles, and she gave it all she had. Just thought I'd share. Hope you and Zach are well.
Nice, Felicia.
Yeah, well, congratulations. That was an excellent marathon. We love hearing that you were able to run your best based on effort.
True that. And we're going to help better equip you with more ways to run your best as we talk about the topic here today. But on Andy's note about providing resources, we have put together now what would be kind of like our baseline fundamental pre-run routine recommendation for everyone. And so we've talked about it in the past. Now you can see the full routine and learn it more easily all at once. And if you'd like to do that, we are willing to share that with you in multiple formats. We got a video of it as well as images in a PDF kind of thing. And so you can have any and all of that for free. Just go to atozrunning.com/free and then, yes, put in your email and we'll send it to you.
Yep, we're excited to get that to you. And now on to our main topic.
Well, if you're joining us midway through the series, what we are doing right now is we're talking about training periods and how you progress through each period in a training cycle to produce the best possible results in your goal event at the end. And on the side note, if you haven't listened to the first two episodes, you definitely ought to. We'll give you a brief recap here as well, but you're going to want to go back and listen to the whole thing to really understand what those things look like. And the most important reason why you should go back and listen to those two episodes, if you haven't, is because those are the two most important periods of training. The first two, the building period and the conditioning period. And so if you don't fully understand how to implement those yet, 99% of the good work you do as a runner to prepare yourself for races that are longer than 400 meters is the content of those two periods. So you definitely ought to hear those. But we'll briefly recap it for you. Starting with, in general, what we're doing with the series is we're taking each period and we're saying, what does this period actually mean and why do you do it? What does that look like? And then how do you know you have successfully achieved or completed the goal of that training period. And so when do you move on?
Because believe it or not, it's not just a certain amount of weeks and then everyone is actually fully prepared after those certain number of weeks.
Usually.
Sometimes it
We're going
takes
to break
longer.
that rule a little bit today, but that is in fact true. Yes. These things don't follow like a 16-week perfect training cycle for your best marathon ever. That's a lie. Anytime someone says this is exactly what everyone should do. Yeah, but when they say this is exactly what every single person should do, they're obviously not being direct, because that's just simply
it's a generalization, because everybody's going to come in with a different amount of fitness to start, different weaknesses, different things going on that might delay or speed up their ability to move on to the next period.
And every coach under the sun does that, by the way. Generalizes. Even in a personalized training experience, you start with a general rule. You have to. Otherwise, what else would you start with? You have to have some kind of baseline. But the best possible scenario for an athlete is adhering to these principles of when you're in a period of training, certain things should be happening to indicate you're ready to move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one layer. And then the final layer is, so what do you do in that training period to then achieve those ends as efficiently and effectively as possible, in the words of Arthur Lydiard.
Mm-hmm. And the first that we talked about was the building period. And it's about building your musculoskeletal strength and resilience. It's very important because that is the base by which you use to do all the rest of your work. And you need to have a strong structure to be able to handle the training load.
Truth. And so in doing that, you're ready to move on to the next one when you can jog very easy for long periods of time without tiring, without getting sore. Like you can handle 2 hours of jogging and it's not really a big deal. Now, as we've mentioned many times, these are the generalizations that we were just talking about. You start with these generalizations. Not everyone's going to be jogging 2 hours because not everyone's going to actually run that long at all in their training. Especially if like you've never run before in your life, I would not encourage you to go out and try to jog 2 hours yet. But that's the kind of like the principle of it. You can jog for long periods of time. You don't get sore and tired to do it. And the best way to get there in a build phase is to just build up your very easy jogging incrementally, slowly over time, until you get to that maximum sustainable volume that you're going to achieve. And if you are not exactly sure what we're talking about there, go back and listen to that episode. Then the next one we covered was conditioning. And the conditioning episode is perhaps, that's like where all the most important stuff is happening for distance runners. So if you missed that, you got to listen to it. But I should note, we got a comment from a listener on that episode in particular that I thought was just well worth sharing. This was a YouTube comment from Gwyn Fan.
That's
Fan.
Ben.
I know, but that's not what his YouTube handle says. We don't have to tell people his name when he's publicly. Okay, so anyway, whatever that YouTube handle is. Thanks, Ben. So he wrote, I had to explain to a few athletes on my team, he coaches, why they still needed to have endurance even as sprinters. There you go. Sprinters, yes, you still need endurance. And here's his rationale, and I love this. The simplest possible explanation. The heart needs to be stronger so you can do more with those muscles you are trying to build. Boom. That's it. That's conditioning. You're getting stronger at a system level, your heart, your lungs, those types of things, so that everything else that you're going to try to do as a runner, you can do better. So it's an aerobic system development that is then the thing that powers the whole machine. And you could call it cardiovascular, respiratory, and all of that. It's kind of layers of your aerobic system. Metabolic, yes. Mm-hmm. So we mentioned this is the single most important period of training, and it's the one where you're going to spend the most amount of your time. As a result, and that when how do you know you're kind of like ready to move on with conditioning is because you are able to handle that long easy run of a substantial amount of time. Once again, like the building, you're not getting sore, you're not tiring, but now it's a little bit higher effort than a jog. You're not just jogging anymore. And then the other side is you can handle sustained strong efforts for about an hour. That's what we tend to recommend. That was Lydiard's recommendation way back when, and it remains solid even today. And so if you can do an hour at a steady, strong effort, and you can do these long runs, and nothing is like wearing you out and making you sore doing that stuff, by that point, chances are you're ready to move on. Barry McGee says, and I think this was actually a
Zach's
Lydiardism.
coach.
Yep. My coach, but also more specifically Barry McGee, the Kiwi Olympian who was coached by Arthur Lydiard. And so he says to all of his runners that we are trying to, within the conditioning period, we're trying to get to the point where we are tireless and effortless with everything we do. We just go out and we just run. We're not doing super aggressive workouts. So we're not saying you could just like run as hard as possible and that would never tire out. But for reasonable and strong, steady efforts and easy efforts, that kind of stuff, you're tireless. So that's how you know. And you're going to accomplish that by doing a lot of combinations of long, easy running, some shorter, steady running, and scattering a fartlek here and there, or some kind of neuromuscular stimulus.
Now, if that doesn't resonate with you, the whole tireless thing, think of it this way. If you are ready the next day, you feel like you could do it again. That's a way to do tireless. If you're actually running it and you're like, wow, this is hard, and then you finish and you're like, okay, that was hard, but then you're recovered for the next day, then you know you're getting to that point.
Yeah, and there's an ebb and flow. We don't expect you to be like tireless every single day, and you're like impervious to running now. But there's a degree of like, yes, you are no longer taxed by those efforts day to day. You're bouncing back easily from them. You're recovering quickly, and it's no problem. Okay, so that's your recap. Now, let's talk about the strength period, which is, in our minds, it is actually, in fact, it is the most dynamic period of training for a distance runner, and it's when all the nuances happen. And the nuances are many. They are myriad. The plethora. How many words can I say? So this is where you say, okay, depending on what race you're training for, what your goal race is, and the distance of that race, the strength period it can look very, very different, and it can be substantially different in length as well. This is also where you start to look at what caliber of training you have been able to sustain, and that's going to also then feed whether or not you even do a strength period, and if you do it, to what degree and how aggressive you are with things. There's so much nuance to this one because the strength period is the most strenuous training that you will do as a distance runner by design. And it is only possible to be successful doing this if, one, in Lydiard's words, you are well conditioned aerobically. Good aerobic condition is the phrase he constantly uses. If you do not have established a good aerobic condition, you should not do a strength phase, period. Strength period is not going to help you and can probably hurt you dramatically if you're not ready for it physiologically. So that's where that conditioning is so imperative. But also, the strength itself, in terms of like what we're doing, is we're basically saying, okay, you've built up all these other things. Now, what else can you do? Because you're ready for something else, but you still have time before your goal race. And that's the best way to think about it. I've still got time for my goal race. I'm ready for something else. So what else can I do? And that's where we answer the question then with the strength phase. Well, we do a few different possible things, but the goal of it is to increase your muscle recruitment, to increase neuromuscular development to a high level. Before we were just addressing it in kind of like a maintenance degree. Now we're talking about high level of neuromuscular development, depending on your goal race. There's different needs there. As well as just like general leg strength. We're just growing, we can address now more areas of strength as opposed to before it was really focused on your system. Okay, so that might be kind of the basic what and why. However, I should note that depending on where you source your information on this period of training, you're going to get a lot of different things, and they're not even all the same. Like sometimes they're multiple periods themselves. So a good example is Lydiard. This is where one of the ways that we most differentiate in our recommendations from Lydiard, and there's good reason for it. We didn't establish this precedent. We didn't make this stuff up. But Lydiard would suggest a strength period and then followed by a coordination period, were his words. We kind of combine the two, and there's a reason for that, and it's largely because the strength and the coordination periods are doing similar things and tend to, for most runners, if you're training to try to win an Olympic gold medal, I would answer this question differently. But most of us are not. In fact, very few of us. And if you're listening to this, chances are you are not trying to win a gold medal in the Olympics.
You don't know that. There's some previous podcast guests that have won medals at the Olympics.
But my point is you're going to achieve the vast majority of your potential development from these types of things in a small amount of time. It doesn't take a large amount of time and with a certain combination of a few things at once. And so that being the case, for most race events, you don't need to do necessarily multiple phases of this kind of development. However, if you're training for shorter distances, no matter what your goal is, we've got some other considerations. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But that's all to say. The strength period itself is going to be very dynamic, highly nuanced, and should be the first thing you drop off your schedule if you don't have enough time to address your conditioning work.
Or you're questioning your stability, or you're questioning
like health,
your hamstring, you're questioning your Achilles.
Yeah, if you're nursing something that is you're not totally healthy and have some kind of nagging or chronic issue, chances are we wouldn't even recommend you do the strength period at all. And if you do, we might do it very differently. So it kind of depends.
For instance, I'm not doing a strength period.
Well, that's because you're coming off a surgery. That's a totally different.
Well, but a lot of people have situations that they can relate, that they might just go do conditioning for their.
Yeah. Well, in this instance with Andy, it's not because there's a specific concern of anything. It's just simply a strength period is not the kind of thing you do unless you've got substantial training development in the recent past. And I'm not talking about a single season of training development. I'm talking about like maybe 2-3 seasons of good quality training with minor disruptions at best. So if you're not in that kind of a situation, you should not do the strength work, or at least not yet. Okay, so that's now setting this up to say proceed with caution and listen to what we're saying here, but now very closely weigh this against your own situation and whether such things would in fact even help you. So how do you know you've actually successfully achieved the goal of the strength period? We always got to start there before we get into then the details of it. And this one, again, deviates from our pattern so far because the strength period has more precise, more specific limitations and can in fact be a little bit more straightforward. For instance, for a marathoner, I would never suggest a marathoner do more than 4 or 5 weeks of strength period training. That's it. Never. I guess there's, in theory, there might be some instances.
Well, like if it was like a mountain marathon?
No, still wouldn't. Because you would address that in other ways too. But I'm talking about at least for, just a standard marathoner running a road marathon of some kind. Yeah. And the reason for that is quite simple because you're not really going to be able to achieve much more by doing this longer than 4 or 5 weeks for longer distance races. It might not help you at all, and it could in fact hurt you. So we don't want to spend too much time on it. If you're doing shorter distance races, let's say you're doing like 5K or 10K or something, then it could look more like 6 to 8 weeks, possibly. But that's where we start to talk about now, like Lydiard suggests a strength and a coordination period as 2 separate periods. We might, in fact, do something like that with shorter distance races. So the strength period is really it's kind of like a part 1 and part 2 as opposed to just all the same thing. So 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes a little bit more for shorter distance races. And then if we're talking about like the super long, the ultra runners, that's a totally different scenario now, and it might be 2 or 3 months or even more. Like if you're doing like a 200 miler or something, it could be even more potentially, because you're going to do something very different during that time than other shorter distances. Okay, so how do you know you've successfully completed it? Well, you've put in the amount of time necessary, desired, and the nuance goes a little bit further than that. So for like shorter distance people, like a 5K, 10K type of thing, the kind of development that you get from that, you can get in about 6 to 8 weeks max. You just really can't get more benefit from it than that. And the marathon and that type of range, half marathon to marathon, maybe somewhere in there, 4 or 5 weeks is kind of your max benefit you're going to get from it. So that's it. You don't really need to worry too much about how it's progressing, because even if it's not going super well, like you're not running, quote, as fast as you think you should, you really shouldn't be doing this for too long either way, because it's not going to like suddenly miraculously make you faster by doing an extra week of strength or something. Okay. So, let me just mention then, this is the way we actually measure it, because now we're talking about the strength period being, remember, the one you drop if you don't have time for other things. If you're training season is not long enough for all the different layers we're talking about. The strength is the first thing to go. So if you can't build good quality aerobic condition in time for your goal race, then you don't do any strength stuff and you move right into the next one.
And when he says strength stuff, he's not talking about like strength training. He's talking about strength in building that using running.
Well, so what Andy meant when she just said strength training, she's talking about like non-running.
Right. We're talking about a certain.
We are only talking about running training right now.
So when he says drop strength training, he's not saying drop strength.
But I am.
I know.
This is confusing people.
Because we're going to tell him, and we're going to tell you all in just a minute how you strengthen your body. So
yes, in terms of running training, this is all. The whole conversation is about running training. Okay, so anyway, the point being, just do this simple math here. You need 2 weeks. Your goal race week is 1, and the week before that is 2. So you need those 2 weeks where you're going to be sharpening, prepping for the race. We'll talk about that on our next episode. However. You just take your current situation and subtract those 2 weeks, and however much time is left after you have built your aerobic condition, that's how much time you do for strength. So if it's 2 weeks, you do 2 weeks of strength, and that's great. That's still going to help you. Even though it's not very much time, it's still going to help you. But if you get to like 5 weeks for longer distances or 8 weeks for shorter distances, you got to cap it. You really shouldn't be doing more than that. And so then the answer there is you should just continue doing conditioning work for another couple of weeks until you get to that point. And if it's, an extra week or 2 of conditioning when you're already pretty well conditioned, it's not going to hurt you. It's just you're not going to gain much more aerobic condition, but you're going to benefit more from the nature of what you're doing next if you don't drag that one out too much. So where do you add the extra weeks? You add them in the conditioning. Now, that said, there's other considerations around. So if you have, let's try to think of an example here right off the top of my head. But the point being that for the amount of time, if it's too much, like if you have an extra 5 or 6 weeks and you're going to throw them somewhere, like I have 4 weeks of strength here, but now I have 6 more weeks and my conditioning is already well established, then at that point I would recommend that you actually find a race here in the near future and like do a couple races. And you're not going to be race ready quite yet. Well, you might actually, because a lot of people run great off of conditioning alone. So you're going to run a couple of races here to just break it up a little bit, and then do some easy recovery for a few days up to a week after a race or 2, and then move into the strength training. And so that's one way to help just occupy that time, because if you have too many weeks in between here, it's not really going to be fun for you to run like just conditioning for another 2 months after you've already really established it. Some people actually really like to do that. Many of our athletes say, I like the conditioning more than anything else now that I'm really doing it. Anyway, point is, you want to look for now kind of a more set amount of time depending on your goal race and distance, and that's going to define it a little bit more. Okay. Now, what do you actually do during the strength? This is the fun part. So the strength period is when you do the stuff that gets you ready for the particular race or races you have focused your season around. So that being the case, depending on which race you're doing, this can look very, very different. And that's part of why it's so fun. This is also where more of the art comes into play, where other things are pretty much straightforward. This kind of time starts to get highly nuanced, because we would even have a situation where an athlete would do 1 week of strength training, and depending on how that went, the next week might look very different. Depending on how that one went, the third one might be even different still. And so depending on what's going on, this can be adjusted. Right. This is supposed to be highly attuned to what you need. Now, there are some generalizations still, and in fact, depending on your goal race distance, the generalizations are pretty accurate in terms of what's going to be most beneficial. But the overall thing is you're trying to now combine basically like the sustained hard running that you need to do for the kind of effort you're doing for your goal race. So the shorter the race, the higher the effort. So sustaining high efforts similar to that goal race, as well as trying to then achieve some variable muscle recruitment. and neuromuscular stimulation. And so there's a couple of different factors involved there. So we will include things like tempos and time trials around race distance, and then a little shorter and then a little longer, unless you're doing something up above 25K, for instance. Then we're not really going to talk about trying to do time trials that are longer than your race distance. That is not effective. That's dangerous to do. But that, there are instances where that it actually could still happen, but they're outliers. Point being, you're going to use longer, sustained, hard efforts that associate with your goal race. And then you're also going to do things like hill workouts or faster fartlek running or some other combinations of those types of things to really achieve some of that leg strength and neuromuscular stuff. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if that's the general, let's talk about what this looks like specifically. Should we start with longer or shorter, Andy?
Let's start with shorter.
Oh, that's the opposite of what I was going to do, but
oh,
fine.
shoot.
No, that's good.
Keep you on your toes.
Yeah, well, sure. So if you're running shorter distances, I would say up to 10K qualifies as a shorter distance. And then if you say, well, what about a 15K or a 12K? I'm going to say, fine, include those in shorter distance. But, the standard races, 5K, 10K types of things, and shorter, this is what it's going to look like. So you want to, for these types of races, you want to be very comfortable running for miles at a time at that degree of effort that race is. So if you're running a 5K, you need to be going out and being able to run 5K effort for 3 miles and have it feel comfortable. And this
Not
is what,
really comfortable.
No, but in theory, you should feel controlled, manageable. So think about it like this. If you're running a 5K, and this is what people always say, all right? People always say, I hate running 5Ks. Not everybody says this, but lots of people say, I hate running 5Ks because it hurts the whole time, right? It should not hurt the whole time. If you're running a 5K and you're training for that goal race distance, you should be able to run 4,500 meters at that effort and feel strong and controlled and manageable. Yes, there's a degree of suffer and it's going to happen at some point, but you should not feel like just running that pace at all is hard. It shouldn't be. For shorter bouts, it should be very easy for you. And then, to put it together for 3 miles, yes, it's going to be challenging because we're talking about, pressuring your system to the whatever degree, maximum possible. But the point is, how do we get comfortable? This is true for any race distance. How do we get comfortable at that degree of effort for a sustained period of time? That's the goal of the strength period, if I could summarize it even more simply than I did earlier. So now for 5K, 10K, shorter distance types of things, the combination to achieve that is a very simple formula. You need to be doing things like tempo to time trial types of efforts. And the difference between tempo and time trial, by the way, is a time trial is basically like a race effort minus a little. Like you're not really truly maximizing everything, but you're running a type of effort that's similar to what you do in a race or a full effort, but you're just not really trying to dip into the well. Okay, so the time trial is close to race effort. A tempo, on the other hand, is more like an 85% of maximum. So you're doing those types of things in 2 quantities, shorter than goal race and longer than goal race, because you want to be comfortable. So if it's shorter than goal race, then the effort is higher than your goal race effort, right? So you want to be comfortable running even harder than your goal race effort. And then you also want to be comfortable running longer than your goal race distance for just a little bit less effort. So you're doing time trials that are a little bit shorter and a little bit longer than your goal race. If your goal race is like a 10-mile race, then we scale that effort back a touch because I don't think it's really great to be doing time trials of 10 to 15 miles on a regular basis. But you might do 1 over the course of a strength period. And then outside of that 1, you'll do other tempo efforts, which are still strong, sustained efforts that are a little bit longer. Okay, so a little bit shorter, a little bit longer. And then the other layer is now we need to do some things with hills, and we're going to get funky and fancy with hills.
Funky and fancy.
Yeah. Was that something?
I think it's funny.
Okay, depending on which race specifically you're doing. So the shorter the race, the shorter we will do things with hills. But for instance, in all situations, you should be treating your hill workouts like most people treat intervals and repeats. You really don't need to be doing, and this is a Barry McGee-ism. This is not a Lydridism, but I completely agree with Barry McGee at the fundamental principle level here. You really don't need to be doing flat repeats in most training for most people. Flat repeats are substantially less effective and less valuable than the same exact type of workout on a hill. The only reason you should do flat repeats and not hill repeats is if you can't do hill repeats healthily. So if that like hurts your Achilles or your calves or something to try to do hills. But here's the reason. The value added of a hill repeat versus a flat repeat is increased muscle recruitment, because now we're talking about a driving motion that's a little bit more exaggerated to go up the hill. So you get some increased muscle recruitment, but also, as it happens, you can achieve a higher system stimulus at a lower effort on hills than you can on flat ground. So you don't have to push your body as hard to get the same system benefit by running on hills. And as a consequence, it's a safer way to push your system to a higher level. So think about that for a second. I just said healthily, right? But in fact, depending on the nature of what is harming you, for instance, someone with hamstring problems, chances are can achieve a better result, like chronic hamstring problems. I don't mean if you've like got a torn hamstring. Don't do a hill workout if you have a torn hamstring. But you can achieve a better result long-term from hill repeats than flat repeats if you've got a chronic hamstring problem, because chances are those flat repeats are more aggravating to your hamstring than the hill repeats. That's one example, but there's your situation individually has to define this. So we do the hill repeats more than the flat repeats. In fact, we don't ever recommend flat repeats. Not to say there's some other flat things we do, but so the hill repeats are going to have that added value. And then we're going to still, the whole point of like, well, I need to be, running flat and fast because I actually am moving faster, right, on flat ground. And so you have to have that neuromuscular comfort with that. Well, remember the time trials are achieving that. But also, there's a final layer where we really do like to feel good running fast. That's an important element. And so we're going to be doing things like super short fartleks, like 20-second or 30-second basically they're sprints with plenty of jogging in between. We do not do, and this is another example here, I think that there is no value ultimately for runners to be doing things like sprint types of workouts, like short, fast intervals with a predefined rest period. It's kind of a strange thing to me that we have these predefined rest periods for these short, fast workouts, because the need, if you think of what you're doing in a short sprint type of thing, now we're talking about speed development. That's highly neuromuscular. And that is the goal of those types of runs. You're really not trying to do anything other than speed development for short, fast sprinting, which means that the rest between should be as much as is needed to feel recovered to go again, so that you're not straining and stressing your system, so that you can achieve as maximum a possible effort as you can for each one.
I think the reason why people have predetermined rest is because they're doing it with other people. So they're saying, okay, everybody start now, and then everybody, here's the rest, everybody go. Like, I
would argue the reason why is because Jack Daniels said to do it in his book, and now everyone does. Or because it's just easier. That's the way that everyone thinks about it.
Or it's like they're giving themselves enough rest where some people would go too soon.
That could be the case. Yep.
But remember here, one of our goals at A to Z Running is to become more intuitive runners. So that is part of the development, though, is learning when it's okay to go again. And having a predetermined rest period eliminates that potential stress, right? Yeah. But it also takes away the potential learning that you might have to know when it's time for you to go again.
Yes, that is in fact a very good point. And what it comes down to with these things is what is it you're trying to achieve from that workout, and what's the best way to achieve that? And so like for the hill repeats, you want to go hard uphill and then Your rest is basically just jog back down the hill, right? However long that takes is fine. It doesn't really matter. But you don't want to like get to the bottom of the hill and then keep jogging and say, I can't, I'm not fully recovered. I want to jog for another 5 or 10 minutes. You don't want to do that in a hill repeat workout, because the goal of the hill repeat workout is muscle recruitment types of things, which you are progressively fatiguing yourself over the course of that workout. So you are running uphill, even though you might not be fully recovered in between each one. And the goal there is, in terms of the intuitiveness, is to try to make sure you're not running so hard that you can't continue the workout. And there's a limit. There's a limit of how much time you should spend going hard up the hill, and it's 20 to 25 minutes maximum for if you're a marathoner or if you're a 5K runner. You don't want to be doing hill repeats for longer than 20 to 25 minutes of total uphill running. So that's a consideration, right? Now, I should mention that there's another layer to, like, you could be doing some short hill sprints in here at times. You could be doing things like form stride, like form sprinting. Good form sprinting is another layer that we include in some of these things. And so it kind of starts to depend now on what is it that's happening and where am I in my progress, and what other things might we need of value. There's a lot to consider there. So that's your basic overview for shorter distance racing, right? I should just mention too, as an aside, because it is highly relevant, is we talk a lot about the concept of speed. So if you're listening to this, chances are you have said to someone at some point about speed workouts or speed training. Remember that in principle, the concept of speed is how fast you can move, right? So as a rule, speed development happens by running as fast as you can. Which means in almost every instance, when someone says something like my speed workout, aka 400 or 800 meter repeats, that is not a speed workout in principle. That's a strength workout. Specifically, it's like an anaerobic strength workout, or it's a
Threshold.
A strength endurance or workout, which is like threshold. Yeah, so it's like something like that, right? Speed development happens when you're running as fast as you can, or when you're expanding your neuromuscular capacity, to be more scientific. And so in order to do that, we have to move fast. And now we can help with that with some of these other things. Like if I'm more comfortable running 400 meters hard, then I'm probably going to be more comfortable running a 100-meter sprint as well. But to achieve true speed development and the efficiency and running economy that results of speed development, we need to be running really fast. And so that's a layer of this that we in fact have very deliberate workouts. And it might be something like you would do a 5K time trial on a Wednesday, and then the very next day on a Thursday, you're doing short sprints or hill sprints even, something like that, right? Why would you do those back to back? Because the sprint workout the next day is not a system development workout. So we're not trying to tax that threshold system that you just taxed in the 5K. We're just working on raw speed development. You can do that even the same day as some of these other workouts because of that kind of like division of, I don't know what the principle or the concept is, but they're two different systems. And so there's some layers of things you can do here. It gets fun. It gets very interesting. I really enjoy it as a coach, working with athletes during these kinds of times. Now, most of us may at some point be doing a longer distance race as well. And that is going to look very different from what we just described, because the shorter distance stuff, you have more available to you. You can do things like time trials that are shorter and longer than your goal races. You will do things in more dynamic responsiveness, and so they can go on for a little bit longer. You might be able to do that for 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how the progression is happening. But for longer distance races, we don't have quite as much flexibility there, because if you're doing like a half marathon, you're not going to be doing time trial workouts that are longer than a half marathon. If you're doing a marathon, you're not going to be doing any workouts that are as long as your goal race distance under our recommendations. So then what instead does this look like? And the same principles apply. They're just scaled differently. So whatever my goal race is, the strength period needs to be the time when I'm developing the concept of being comfortable running at higher efforts, right? And so for longer distance races, that just means that I might have a little bit shorter and faster workout and a little bit longer and not quite as fast workout. And the distances are relative to each other, not necessarily to the goal race distance. They scale to the goal race distance. So if I'm running a marathon, I might try to do 2 to 2.5 hours at a steady effort. And that might be one of my workouts. Now that, of course, is also my long run for the week. And so that's going to be, I'm not going to do another easy long run. But if I'm running a half marathon, I might not do more. I might do 2 hours maximum for a steady, strong effort. But the principle of it is the same as the shorter distance races in terms of that combination of some shorter and some longer hard efforts. You want to be comfortable at and beyond your goal race effort. For any race distance, you need to be comfortable at and beyond your goal race effort. So you exercise that in the same kind of way, and then we still include the recommendation of some hills in here because we want that additional muscle recruitment. As your systems fatigue and as your muscle groups fatigue in any race distance, the more your body can recruit to achieve that running mechanic, the longer you can sustain a high effort before you have failure, total system failure. And so that's where the hills are highly valuable if our system is ready to handle it, because it just adds a layer here. It's not a substantial one. It's not like some huge impact that's going to make a major difference, but it's a layer. And so now we're talking about what's the difference here immeasurably. Does it mean I run a minute faster in my marathon? Does it mean I run 30 seconds faster in my half marathon? Who knows? It could be something like that, but we're not going to try to measure it that way. We're just going to talk about there's another layer of value by doing something like some hill repeats. And since you're doing longer races, you're going to be doing a little bit longer hill repeats. And I should note, I didn't say this earlier, but when we are talking about things like hills, the long hill, we might try to find hills that are like 3, 4, 5 minutes of uphill running as consistently as possible. So I'm not talking about just like a rolling hilly road, but can I find a hill that takes me 5 minutes to get up? And that's not always easy to do.
It's become one of Zach's hobbies, actually.
Yeah. In fact, many of our runners will say when they get to this point, okay, where am I going to run this hill repeat? Because I have no hill that's going to be that long. So yeah, we get out our handy dandy elevation maps, whatever those
he loves it.
maps
Don't let
are
him
that
fool
provide
you.
elevation. It's fun. It's a blast. Okay, so that's the gist of it. I should say this. I want to address this because many of our athletes are even skeptical is actually an appropriate word here. When we start to say the maximum hard effort you're going to do, no matter what you're training for, is 2 to 2.5 hours. Okay? So I'm going to say that to a runner, and the runner's going to say, but it takes me 4 hours to run a marathon. How am I going to be able to handle that? I'm never running a run longer than 2.5 hours in my entire training season. How can I handle running for 4 hours? And I have 2 answers to you, and they're very simple, and they're going to work every time. So listen to me and do it. Well, okay. Or let's have a conversation, and that I can be nice too. But the point is, we're talking about training efficiency for a moment here, and longer than 2.5 hours, even shorter than that sometimes, increases the demand on your systems and your structure, and as a result, potentially increases things like recovery time and the need for recovery time, which decreases the volume of stimuli you can achieve. So there's an efficiency scale here, and the balance tips the wrong direction when we start running efforts longer than 2.5 hours. Now, there's going to be times where a runner should do 3-hour easy runs or something, but I would never suggest a runner do longer than 2.5 hours at a steady effort. I say never, but sometimes it happens where it's 2 hours and 40 minutes or 2 hours and 45 minutes. But the point is, we have a kind of maximum. We're really not trying to exceed that because the costs begin to outweigh the benefits. So there's that. However, the other side of this is the runner will say, yes, but I still haven't run. You've got me running no more than 18 miles, and I got to go out and run 26. How can I do that? Well, the answer here is you're not running 18 miles. You're running an entire season worth of training an entire week at a time worth of training, you're not just doing a single 18-mile run in terms of preparing your body for 26 miles. And it's absurd to think I have to run 24-mile long runs to be ready for 26 when all the other stuff you're doing is also contributing to your physiological preparedness for the 26-mile run. You don't need to run that long to be ready to run that long. You just need to train substantially enough that your system can handle 26 miles of race effort. And once you can do that, it doesn't matter how many long runs you did at whatever the distances were. If we can achieve that end by whatever means are most efficient and effective, you're going to be fine for the 26-mile run. Now, that said, ask us these questions. Put them in the month, because we want to answer these in context. Yeah. It's even better. Yep. But that's the gist of it for your strength.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Zach.
Well, and let me just I guess wrap it up by reminding you, because if there's just the kind of like what we're cluing into here is there's that answer. We often talk about this with our runners where it's like, okay, by the time we're done with conditioning, we know that you can handle the distance. Like, it's clear that your body can run for long periods of time. You're not fatiguing. You're not tiring. I've got no doubt you can handle 26 miles of running based on what we've done in training, right? So for the marathoner example, we know you can handle the distance. And then we can say, we also know you can handle the effort for shorter distances. The question is, can you handle that amount of effort for that long? And that's what the strength period answers, kind of in a nutshell, which I think is helpful. Also, just remember, as we started it all off by saying, this period is not a necessity. It is not a requirement to be prepared for your race or to be ready to race well. It is a luxury that only happens as a result of the preparedness you achieve by the previous two periods.
That's good, because some of us aren't going to be doing the strength this time around.
Many. And most, in fact, will not be doing this every single season, and that's all right.
Mm-hmm. Well, is that it, Zach?
I suppose that's it.
All right. Well, let's get to the world of running. This was a big week for A to Z runners. Lots of racing. We're getting into the goal race season for so many.
It's so exciting.
Very exciting.
Remember all that talk we've been talking about Rivertown races, and we've been talking about like if you're training for a goal race this spring. Well, it just so happens almost all of our runners are running goal races in the next 4-ish weeks, and that means that a lot of people are racing other races as well, whether they are their goal races right now or are races prior to. So
yes. At Rivertown races, where we met some of you.
Very exciting.
So that was fun. We did have some A to Z runners running really fast. Bill with a PR in the half. This was a season opener, so that's phenomenal. Kyle ran a PR. Martha ran a fast 10K. Erin was fourth. She was fourth overall woman. Julie was the Masters winner. Emily P. ran a fast half. Michaela ran a 5K with her daughter. And Craig got out there again. He's like our champion of running lots of races. So that was great to have him out there too.
That was. And I love Craig's perspective here on this one, because it's just kind of encapsulates like part of what we love about running in general. Is he's like, well, I was going to do a long run, but then I was like, I could go to that race and do my long run with other people and kind of in an exciting environment. And it's like, why pass that up?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it was fun to see him too. Yeah. So that was another bonus of that. And then Stephanie ran a 15-minute PR and her first Boston qualifier at Jersey City Marathon.
Not so bad.
It was extraordinary. So awesome. We knew she was ready for a big race, and just to see her absolutely crush it and get her first BQ. She's been going after it for a while, so that was a wonderful thing. And then Mark ran a 3-minute PR and another BQ for him, and he did that at the Glass City Marathon. And then in the half at Glass York City, Ben and Sarah ran half marathons. Sarah ran an even stronger than anticipated half marathon, so that was exciting. And then Audie ran the London Marathon, another star.
Another notch on the majors series. Nice work.
Speaking of the London Marathon, we're going to kick things off with the London Marathon and the news that happened there. BBC News reported that this London Marathon had the largest field in history with 48,000 participants.
Yeah, which puts it close to one of the biggest marathons now ever, I think. Don't quote me on that. I guess I don't know for sure but in terms of like marathon majors events and stuff, 48,000 is way up there.
It's a big event. A couple interesting facts about this race. One being, it was Mo Farah's last marathon as a pro athlete.
Sir Mo
has
got to go.
He doesn't have to go.
Well,
I'd like to see him stay.
He's going to go.
He ran decently well in this race. I believe he ran like a 2:10. So
sure,
he still ran a very solid run, very fast. I mean, compared to what he's done, I'm sure this is one of the motivations for maybe starting to think about retirement, but it's fast. It's a fast time. So
yeah, good.
We'll miss him on the scene. Now, a couple records that happened. Some Guinness.
Not just a couple.
45. Guinness Book of World Records. This, I guess they partnered with the Guinness Book of World Records in this race to try to get more people to break the records.
Why?
Because it's funny and it's fascinating. It brings publicity. Like, I want to talk about it.
Here's my general comment about this, which is I feel like because there's like an unlimited. Well, there's an unlimited number of possible records for Guinness with this type of stuff, because all you could do is say Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest marathon time wearing a pink suit. Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest marathon time wearing a blue suit, and you can do that. Because that's basically,
to get certified, though.
Yeah, but all you have to do is go to the Guinness thing and
Not
apply
that easy. But I have to say, this was very fascinating, and I'm going to put Zach on the spot, and I'm going to ask him to look through them and choose the one that he would be willing to do.
That's not actually putting me on the spot. I already looked through them once.
Oh.
But, well, it kind of is, I guess, because I only looked through some of them. But the one that stands out to me is the lifeguard one. That's a piece of cake. I could run a marathon in a Speedo any day. Solved.
I guess the less you're wearing, the easier it would be. I think a toga, maybe that would be a good one. Let's see, fairy tale characters. There's so many funny, interesting ones. Savory food. Fastest marathon dress is a savory food.
Not eating a savory food?
That was pretty fast. 3:11.
Okay, if you dressed as a savory food, what would you wear?
As a savory food?
Like wrap yourself in
bacon?
Garlic sauce? I mean, what's...
Yeah, what counts as savory?
I don't know. I
don't
even know what savory is. So like...
It's a...
Okay, well, anyway, we don't need to hear us try to figure out what savory means. All right, so all of this, I mean, you got a scientist, a golfer, a fairy tale, a lucha libre wrestler. That's funny.
Fastest marathon wearing a suit and dress shoes.
Okay.
That actually would be kind of funny to
actually,
watch.
I saw or read a story once about a guy who ran New York Marathon in dress shoes because he forgot his running shoes.
No
He's coming
way.
like straight from a work trip or something.
That's
so all he had was dress
horrendous.
shoes. So he just ran it anyway. I wouldn't.
No.
I wouldn't do it. I'd go to a store and find running shoes somehow.
Or I'd like buy someone's trainers off them.
Right. Hey, I see
Give an
you're
extra
switching
pair of
shoes right now.
trainers.
What size are your trainers? Yeah.
Oh, that sounds miserable. And speaking of footwear, I think the last one on there, Zach, if you don't mind scrolling
The very
down,
last one
is running in clogs.
Clogs, yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine wearing clogs? Wow. That sounds painful.
What about as a 3-dimensional plant or a 3-dimensional aircraft?
Interesting.
I don't know.
I think that means it has to like go in all it has to go all the way around.
Dressed
you.
as a knight. Okay, here's one that I
one.
think is funny. Because all of these are just people wearing costumes, but this one is fastest marathon carrying a household appliance.
That was run in 4:52:10.
What's the household appliance?
So if you did a smaller one, you'd have a better chance of running faster. Like if you were carrying like a
Microwave?
microwave, that would be really heavy. That'd be really hard.
Carry a blender?
But if you were carrying like a toaster, that might be a lot easier
Yeah, naturally.
naturally.
I still don't know that I would do it.
Okay, all that to
All right.
say, there's a lot of interesting ones.
Silly.
Take a look. See which ones you think you might want to break. I mean,
I
why
want to
not?
run a race with a bunch of other people, all dressed as Scooby-Doo characters, reenacting a scene from Scooby-Doo over the course of the race. That's what I want to do.
Are you like soliciting the help of our listeners?
Nope, because I'm not actually going to do
You're not
this.
committed to it.
Right. But that's if I did something like this.
But now
that's
we
the kind
all
of thing
should
I would
hold
wanna
him
do.
accountable to do this
You don't have to hold me.
idea.
I just said I'm not actually going to do it.
Hmm.
That's just the way I would want to do something like this if I did.
All right, well, let's get on to the main events.
The literal event.
Women's marathon. Very exciting till
It
the
was.
last moment, but it started off very dramatically after record holder Bridget Kosgei began limping and pulled out just after 3 minutes into the race.
Yes. So let's talk about that because this happens and there's a reason for it. So many of these professional runners have a contract with the race, and the contract might say something like you have to run this race 2 of the next 3 years or something. And what that means then is they have to start the race. As long as they start the race, they're fulfilling the contract. So a runner might be injured and say, well, I can't run it next year. This is the end of my term period with it, so I have to start the race for the sake of that contract. But I'm definitely not going to run it because I'm literally injured. I might have a broken foot right now. So I'm going to start the race, run a few minutes, and then just step off the course. And that's what she just did.
But she said she thought maybe she would be able to do it. I don't know. I saw like a little PR
Probably she
statement
did say that.
from her.
So that it doesn't sound like she knew ahead of time and just
Yeah.
was, ducking everyone.
But it is a little bit of a sad piece of this puzzle because it was one of the strongest marathon groups in history. The competition was really strong, and it still was even
Yeah.
without her. But of course, she's the world record holder. She holds a personal best of 2:14:04.
Yeah, that's quick.
Oh,
Right.
so fast.
Now, as it were, the nature of how the race unfolded was itself consistently interesting.
More drama ensued when Sifan Hassan, making her debut,
A very anticipated
Mm-hmm.
debut.
stopped at
Like,
15 miles.
Just stopped running.
Stopped running to stretch. She
You know.
said later that she had some quad issues, so she was stretching. She stopped twice to tend to this issue she was having. And I think that at that point, people were like, okay, well, it's her first time out. Like, there's a lot of things in her training that were not perfect, and she was concerned. Even beforehand, there was lots of ruckus about some funny things she said in the pre-interviews that they had there, the press conference. She was saying, like, I cried this morning. I didn't want to do this. Oh, no, that was after the race because it was that
after,
morning.
yeah.
But, like, she's like, why? I just wonder why I'm doing this. Like, why did I decide to run the marathon?
all the rest of us were wondering that too.
Well, she's like, now I've committed to this. But anyway, so people are like, okay, well, it's her first marathon. She's figuring it all out. Well, no. I mean, she is. But at the same time, like, she wasn't done. People should not be counting her out because she started
Even when she stopped multiple times in the race, she wasn't done.
she started reeling them all back in, and she pulled herself back up with like a group of 5 for a bit, and then it dwindled down to 3. And those 3 had a sprint to the finish.
So they're running, the 3 of them, in a clump until the point where they round the final corner, which in the London Marathon means you've got just under 200 meters left. That's it, 200 meters left. And they round that corner, and there's still all 3 of them together. And I'm just sitting here watching this thinking to myself, why do you want to be in that situation at that moment? That is the worst place to be because now you have to run all your guts out as hard as you possibly can to the line.
But Sifan Hassan, that is her most comfortable place.
That's
to
in
be.
fact what she likes to do most in
Yeah.
races.
She's probably really glad that they didn't start taking off
Yeah.
earlier because the closer she is to the finish, the more confident she's going to be because she has the closing speed that none of them have. I mean, they have closing speed. They're world class, but she's world class on the track.
I mean, they don't have her closing speed clearly
No.
because she just punishes them, puts 4 or 5 seconds on the other 2 in the last 100 meters.
It was crazy. So Sifan Hassan won her debut marathon, even with an imperfect buildup, an imperfect race itself, she still came through
What a
as
run.
the champion of a world major, which she said in an interview I read that this is just as important to her as her Olympic medals, winning this marathon major, that she'll look back at this as a very proud moment for her.
Great.
Yeah.
As well, she ought to be.
Yeah.
Be proud of it. I'm not so inclined as to jump on the GOAT bandwagon that everyone seems to be on right now, where it's like, Sifan Hassan, is she the greatest of all time? And it's like, well, I mean, she did win a race that's important.
Bridget
and it's a
Kosgei,
challenging race.
Doesn't she have both the debut record and the
No, the debut record is whoever debuted right ahead of Letezen Bedgide, right?
was it Almez Ayana?
No. It was just recent. But
Okay.
Point being, this time is like 2 minutes slower than the next best person's debut. The debut record, 3 minutes maybe. I can't remember exactly what the time is. But so like her time is fast. It's not crazy fast, but London's not a crazy fast course. So I'm not too concerned about
Paula
that.
Radcliffe held the world record from her London race years ago. So
Yeah, London can
it
be
can
fast.
be fast.
It
And
can,
then
it's true.
also, wasn't Eliud Kipchoge also ran a 2:01 and change there too, didn't he?
No.
Was it 2:02 then? It was.
You're talking about the guy who won the race this year.
No. Okay, so then LMU Megurtu from Ethiopia was second in 2:18:37, and then Perez Chepchirchir, who was one of the favorites, 2:18:38.
So there were the three who rounded that corner together. Tight pack.
Yep. But I have to say it was interesting because I was hoping that one of the other two of these ladies would go to challenge Sifan Hassan, because they should know.
Andy, they were trying.
Oh, you think so?
I mean, they were trying to run faster.
Of course, yeah. I guess so. But like, I feel that the lack of confidence was what they could have maybe preyed on when it came to Sifan Hassan, because she waited till she saw the finish, only 200 meters.
Yeah, your best strategy to beat Hassan in that moment, realizing that she was already like struggling earlier in the race, is as soon as she catches back up to the leaders, you surge again. And at your own potential detriment, that's your best strategy if she's the one you think you have to beat. I guarantee you, no one in that race was thinking she was the one I have to beat. Not like she alone. They're thinking I have to beat all of the rest of these people. And if I play games to beat Sifan Hassan, I might lose to everyone else. So, yeah, in a field like this, you don't play those kinds of games. But at the same time, knowing now what we do, those are the games that you needed to play if you wanted to beat her. Yeah.
Well, another shout out I want to make, number 10, 10th overall for the women, Susanna Sullivan of the USA, first U.S. woman. She ran a personal best time of 2:24:27. And I'm majorly impressed by Susanna Sullivan because she's a full-time teacher in running. So
you know what they say,
fast.
those who can't do teach. But apparently she can do. And I'm joking, Andy. That was just a terribly mean thing for me to say. So you're
he's a teacher, he can say that.
No, I'm just trying to be funny and didn't get a rise out of you. I'm amazed. So the point here is you're a world-class marathoner, and yet no one's giving you money to run marathons, which is shocking because there aren't that many marathoners in the U.S. faster than that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Citius Mag does what Citius Mag does and writes in the post where they amplify Susanna Sullivan by saying something like, oh, unsponsored, no shoe sponsor, to try to get a shoe sponsor to pay attention.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is quite amazing that the best from our country represented at a world major, the London Marathon, in our sport is not a professional. Think of all the professional athletes on all of the NFL teams and all the baseball teams that are paid salaries, okay? And then the best in our country at a world major doesn't have that. It blows my mind.
Like doesn't have any.
Doesn't have that support. So, yeah, it's just one of the flaws of our country's view of running. But I digress. Let's go to some more exciting news in the wheelchair race for the women. Australia's Madison de Rosario won in a sprint finish. So they also had a sprint finish for the wheelchair race.
Which is wild and crazy because they're already going fast, and the degree of like precision control to get those wheelchairs going that fast without losing control is quite impressive.
De Rosario won over Manuela Scar by only 1 second. There were 4 women within 6 seconds. And I should mention to you to listen in and tune in when the name Madison De Rosario is said, because she is on a streak. She's a 2-time Paralympic winner in Tokyo. She has 3 world titles and 4 Commonwealth golds.
And in the last week or 6 days, finished top 2 in 2 marathon majors because she was
winning
second
London,
in Boston.
runner-up in Boston, which that is a quite... That feat is just incredible to me, that she did the Boston course and then followed that up with such a great London marathon, which was a course record, by the way.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the men's marathon side, all the drama of the women's race was not represented in the same way, but it had its drama, which was Kelvin Kiptum, who over the course of the second half of the race started to make the announcers say things like, is he going to run a world record? Like, what's happening right now? What are we witnessing?
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't all that far off when those predictions started coming down, because he ended up finishing, 18 seconds behind the current Kipchoge world record by running 2:01:25 to win by like 3 minutes. And this is only his second marathon.
Mm-hmm.
So, not just his second marathon, the second fastest ever all-time marathon, and his first marathon was the third fastest all-time in 2:01:53 as the fastest debut marathon, and now he's the only marathoner who's run more than one marathon and never run 2:02 or slower, right? So, okay, this is... Everyone's talking about this like, what's going on here? There's something
special.
There's something entirely out of the ordinary. And you could talk about like all the craziness that's been happening lately with the shoes technology and all that stuff. And that's all true, but no one's doing this. So, yes, I'm a little bit skeptical.
But at the same time, enthralled.
We'll just
have a lot of
keep watching
excitement
and keep enjoying. And we just, we have to understand that things like this are going to happen because the sport has taken an edge now of so much precision in terms of the marathon, in part because of the work that Nike did in developing that Breaking 2 stuff and some of the research they helped kind of they were doing themselves, but also others were doing as well because of what they were starting to publish. In part because of the shoe technology developments, in part because these race courses now are just getting faster and faster. Like they're developing these marathon race courses that are like, you will only run fast here because we've got everything perfect.
But that's not London.
So, no, in fact, it's not. And the weather wasn't that either. So Kelvin Kiptum did this on a day and a place that this shouldn't really be happening, which just made it that much more impressive.
Right. So specifically what he did was run the fastest second half in history in a time of 59:45.
Holy smokes.
It is so fast.
Okay, so take a trivia question here. How many countries in the world have a national record half marathon faster than 59:45? The answer is like 4 or 5, maybe. So he just ran the second half of his marathon faster than almost every other person in history has done a half marathon.
Wow.
That's... I don't really know yet what to think about that.
Yeah. Well, also, another thing to add into the amazement is that most people in this race were slowing down because the weather turned and it was raining.
Not only. And, of course, it's raining,
But, of course, I should say that the impact would be lesser for him because he was almost finishing, right? So he had to endure the poor weather.
He ran in it for less time than everyone else.
But still,
That's true.
women, I don't know when it started raining because the women were also impacted.
Yeah.
That was, 59:45, well under 2 hour marathon pace.
Yeah. So now this is something he, in fact, is prone to do, because he did that in his opening marathon as well in Valencia. He ran 60:15 that time, so 30 seconds slower in the second half, which his time was about 30 seconds slower. So in fact, that's like the difference right there. He just chopped a little bit more time off in the second half than he did the first time he did a marathon. Yikes. That's there is one comment that we should all consider here, which is we have to remember that because of the benefits of the shoe technology and what they're doing in terms of energy return, is they're allowing you to run closer to like a maximum capacity with less energy expenditure for longer periods of time. And so you're going to get situations like this where a well-conditioned athlete can run the second half of a marathon not far off of half marathon PR time, because the first half of the marathon, they are not yet overextending their systems. But I don't know how it's possible for him not to be overextending his systems at the pace that he's running for the first half. So,
yeah. Well, it's exciting. Wow. We're living in exciting times. Now, further down, well, next in the race, but 3 minutes
3 minutes
after,
later, Jeffrey Kamwarar came across the finish line.
And he ran a PB of 2:04:23. And this was really exciting for him. He expressed a lot of excitement because he has been going through bouts of injury and has been one of the best in the world. So for him, it's been a journey to get back to where he's been at. And he said before the race he was at his 2018-2019 shape. He thinks he's in the best shape he's been in for the marathon, which he proved by running a full minute personal best. You'll remember him as the 2-time world cross-country champion, and he's been the world half marathon champion. So he's had a lot of success. So it's good to see him back healthy and on the podium at the London Marathon.
And then next in line, third place, was Tamurat Tola, the defending world champion in the marathon as well, just under 2:05. So you get times like that. For London, usually those kinds of times are going to be, close to winning the race, which in this instance they were, minus Kiptum. And so very impressive performances there for second and third as well. And just, a little bit overshadowed by such a stunning run by Kiptum.
Another big headliner for the race dropped out, Kenenisa Bekele. He stayed with the leaders for almost halfway, and he ended up dropping between 25K and 30K.
One of the considerations with Bekele ongoing at this point tends to be he runs every race like he is going to try to win it, but he is not these young guys anymore, and has had a very hard time putting together a successful race consistently in the last several years, in fact. So it's one of those where it's like, if he's kind of putting himself out there and seeing what he can do still, but he's comparing himself to someone else's standard, and that doesn't always work out super well. I mean, we would argue it doesn't really ever work out super well, but for him, it's worked out less and less well.
I'd like to see him find out what his potential is right now, because I think he would be phenomenal as a master. He's a Masters runner, so he could really put some amazing times on the board for the Masters division. Yeah. Well, speaking of Masters runners, we had a Masters runner get a Boston Marathon streak record.
Streak records. Yes. These ones I have lots to say about streak records.
Boston marathons.
How many?
She did 37 consecutive Boston marathons.
Yeah.
77-year-old woman runner, Patty Hung. And she says that she's not done.
Well, why would you be?
Yeah.
Until you can't anymore. So
she essentially said that it's defined a lot of her life and that it's a tradition. It wasn't ever about breaking the record, but rather continuing to do this thing that she loves and enjoys. She started running in her 30s and took on her first Boston in 1987.
Yeah, so that's a lot of Boston marathons.
Yeah. She used to live in Boston, and now she lives in California. So there's probably like some nostalgia too, and I'm sure she has friends because
family or friends.
She probably knows like all the people involved in the racing scene in Boston.
I mean, maybe 30 years ago she did, but
I'm just saying she keeps coming back. She probably
I
has
know,
friends. That's
I
what
know.
I'm saying.
that's cool. Well, so we also wanted to just mention here, because in terms of like past events and just interesting things happening, the world running scene and the United States running scene are very different pictures. And we get a nice, clear example of that when looking at the actual data around the World Championships held in Oregon.
Yeah.
First time ever holding the World Athletics Championships in the United States in 2022. And it raises the question, how did they do?
How did it go? Well, let me give you some numbers. The return in media exposure was 2-1. Oregon invested $40 million in cash, and they received double back.
Okay, so that sounds positive.
That sounds positive. Now, who was watching?
Now that's the question. Who would watch when the United States is hosting the World Championships for the first time ever?
What do you think? Just
not
think in
not
your head.
Americans, I can tell you that.
Well, you probably got that from our tone, but
Yeah.
39%, so the top amount, the most percentage, was watched in Africa and Middle East.
Now the fact that they lumped those two together makes it more likely that they're going to get a higher percent, because those are not necessarily the same region of the world.
Well, same with these other regions. So 33% were in Asia Pacific region, 20% in Europe, and 9% in the Americas. So that's
Okay.
North America and South
Oh,
America.
I see. So
those
they
are
just
also,
took the four major regions of the world.
yeah.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
So I'll say again, 9% were in the Americas,
Yeah.
North and South America.
Well, that's bad.
Yeah. Among individual countries, the U.S. was 5th.
Okay.
Number 1, I'm sure Zach would have guessed it. Maybe some of you would too. So think about that for a second. Little trivia. Japan.
Japan, number one viewer in the world.
By
Yeah.
a lot. By
Not-
double. More than double.
The next. And that's not at all surprising, because Japan loves running.
They love running. And I love them for loving running.
Indeed. And they've kind of figured it out. And
Yeah.
the Japanese know how to make running like a cool thing and a national thing. And it's just really something different over there.
And a corporate thing.
Yeah.
Number 2, China.
Okay. Not surprising, because there's a lot of people watching,
It's a big country.
and that helps. Yep.
Number 3, Great Britain.
Also not surprising, because Great
love
Britain
track.
loves athletics.
Yes, they do.
Love track and field.
4th, Nigeria.
Now that's the big surprise.
Yeah.
Now there's a reason for it. That at a minimum, the Nigerian athletes, the headliners, are like national heroes.
They are.
And so these ones in particular are especially excellent, like the female sprinter who set world records in the hurdles, right, in the World Championships. So like, you know, they've got more incentive of interest than you know, just a country that has people competing in that sense. But Nigeria is also not huge in terms of population compared to some of these other places, and yet they're 4th most viewership
I love it.
hours. Yeah. Wow.
Number 5, as we mentioned, is the United States.
Yeah. I
At just
have
a
so many
fraction.
things I could say.
At just a fraction of the amount watched in Japan. So
Right.
35.4 million hours watched compared to Japan's 254.1 million hours watched.
Yeah. I think the part, though, that is the most distressing to me is actually the next and final
Yes.
statistic, which is in-person viewership.
In-person viewership, the people at the event itself. There was 150,000 attendees, of whom 84% were from the USA. Of the 16% who came from outside the U.S., 35% were making their first visit to the United States. But the meet was highly localized. 49% of all spectators came from Oregon,
Yeah.
and 32% from the Eugene area specifically.
So that's the part that's like, all right. Basically, nobody in the United States cared about this thing happening. Like, you could think about, okay, we start to look at numbers like some of the big major competitions all over the country, right? Like NCAA March Madness, like the Super Bowl, the World Series, you know, all these things. And it's like people are flocking there from all over the place. Not so for the World Championships.
So I was reading a few of the statistics, and I didn't write them all down here, but essentially what I gathered was that it didn't have a great improvement on the economical advantage for Eugene. So like since most of the people were local and some people were coming in from just out of town, they were just driving in for the day, there wasn't a lot of tourism, which is one of the reasons that people want to host World Championships or the Olympics or a big event. They want to bring tourism to their town, and I guess that was one of the letdowns of this event.
Is there anything to tour in Eugene
Lots
except
of
for that
beautiful
facility?
Trees and
Lots of trees.
it's actually, I've been there and it's nice.
Yeah.
I would recommend it actually. But there's a couple things that like we didn't end up going. We would have liked to do that, but cost of flights were very expensive to Portland. And then the second part of that was that the accommodations there wasn't like a lot of accommodations there.
So also super expensive. I mean, so cost of living types of things are really high in that area. And so that, just makes it harder in general in that sense. But what was the most challenging was actually just availability. Like it was hard literally to acquire tickets or to find lodging. And so there just wasn't enough, you could say, capacity. But part of that, so tickets were hard to come by. Like even if you were willing to spend astronomical prices, they were still hard to acquire. And yet the stands were never full.
Yeah.
Not even close.
We found that to be interesting because it said sold out, sold out, sold out. But then the stands weren't full when we saw the coverage because we watched.
Scalpers. Those scalpers didn't even do their job well.
I know. They didn't even sell them. Anyway, all that to say, we're glad that it happened in Eugene. Again, the good number to take away from this is a 2-to-1 as far as the investment. And hopefully we can start having more of an attraction to the areas, more tourism. But the U.S. needs to start watching track and field.
Well, not likely anyone's going to do that just on account of us saying so. But we at least can do our part and help keep you all informed of the interesting, fascinating, and fun things happening all over the place. And do our part even further still by sharing as much and as often of our own informations and knowledges and insights as we can in the sport of running. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're all about. And that's what we want to do more of, which is why you need to ask your questions.
Yeah, for next week's episode.
In fact, go to AtoZRunning.com/question to share anytime you would like. And we, at the end of each month, will answer those. We'll also respond to your emails and share some thoughts there too. But we want to answer your questions. And we're going to do it next week.
Yep. So until then, have some great running.